200 African children, starving, enslaved, invisible to the world. No shoes, no names, just broken hands digging for gold in the belly of the earth. Their cries never made the news. Their suffering never trended online. Because this wasn't Europe. This wasn't somewhere powerful. This was deep in the forgotten jungles of West Africa. And while the world looked away, one man refused to. At 3 a.m., President Ibrahim Traoré did the unthinkable. He led a team into the darkness, risking his life to pull every single child out. Not for cameras, not for votes, but because justice doesn't wait for permission. And now as the truth unfolds, we're left with one haunting question. Does justice only matter when the world is watching? This story is a dramatization inspired by real injustice told to stir real emotion. Because though this tale may be fictional, the pain it reflects is tragically real. And somewhere right now, another child is still waiting for someone brave enough to care. Ouagadougou slept. The capital city of Burkina Faso, usually teeming with motorcycles, dusty vendors, and the distant rhythm of djembe drums, now lay under a blanket of stillness. The streets shimmered faintly under the pale orange glow of old street lamps, the air thick with heat and quiet. Inside the presidential palace, everything was silent, eerily so. Guards stood like statues at every corridor, their eyes alert but weary. The building itself, though grand in scale, felt cold. Heavy marble floors swallowed footsteps. Curtains hung like shadows. A single chandelier above the hallway flickered, as if sensing something approaching. In the heart of that quiet, behind a thick wooden door, sat President Ibrahim Traoré, alone hunched over a long desk. The dim light of a green banker's lamp cast tired rings around his eyes. Documents were spread across the polished mahogany surface: school reform policies, rural development budgets, letters from provincial governors. A half-empty cup of black coffee had long gone cold. Nearby, the old clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second echoing like a countdown. Tick, tick, tick. Traoré rubbed his temple with one hand and flipped to another page with the other. His eyes were sharp, but you could tell the day had been long. He had spent it mediating a land dispute in the north, then attending a funeral for a fallen soldier. And yet here he was, signing a proposal to build schools in provinces where children had never seen a classroom. He paused for a moment and leaned back. The weight of leadership wasn't always in the battles, it was in the silence after. In the loneliness of 1 a.m. decisions, in the choices no one saw, but that defined who you really were. Then a sharp sound cut through the quiet. A phone rang, but not just any phone. The secure line. The one with no number. The one that only rang when something was truly wrong. Traoré froze. His eyes locked onto the blinking red light on the black rotary device at the corner of his desk. For a moment, the world held its breath. Ring, ring, ring. He picked it up. His voice was calm, firm. "This is the president." There was silence on the other end. Just breathing. Then a voice, thin, cracked, terrified. "Mr. President, please don't hang up. I don't have much time, and I don't know if I'll survive after this call." Traoré sat upright, suddenly wide awake. "Who is this? I can't say. If they find out I called you, they'll kill me." The voice trembled, but the words came faster, more desperate. "There are children, over 200 of them, trapped, working like animals. It's a gold mine, illegal, hidden. Eastern region, near Compiègne. They're starving, Mr. President. Some of them are only 5 years old." A chill moved through the room. Traoré gripped the phone tighter. His military instincts kicked in, but so did something else. Something deeper. Older. Fatherhood. "Where exactly?" he asked, tone low, urgent. "Follow the old logging road. Past the timber factory. There's a path into the forest. No one goes there. No one comes out." The line crackled. "Please. You're the only one who can stop this." Click. The call ended. Traoré sat motionless for 3 full seconds. Outside, a low wind rustled through the palace gardens. The chandelier stopped flickering, and then slowly Traoré stood. He didn't panic. He didn't speak. He simply walked over to the wall and pressed a hidden button beneath a wooden panel. An intercom buzzed to life. "Wake General Alba. Summon Commander Idris. Tell them we move tonight." President Ibrahim Traoré didn't sit back down. He stood still, gripping the receiver, as if the voice on the other end had left behind a presence, something invisible but heavy hanging in the air, like smoke after gunfire. The silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes just before lightning tears the sky open. He stared at the wall for a long second. Then, lifting the receiver again, he pressed the redial button, hoping irrationally that the caller might still be there. The line buzzed once, twice, then went dead, untraceable. He returned the phone to its cradle and stared at his desk. The documents he'd been reading, education proposals, national scholarship drafts, suddenly felt hollow. What good were classrooms and books if the children who needed them were buried under dirt, bleeding into the soil? Traoré turned, walked to a small cabinet by the window, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, a military fatigue jacket, his from the battlefield days, folded with care. He stared at it for a moment, then took it out and laid it over his desk. He could still hear the voice. "Please, Mr. President, I don't know if I'll survive after this call." The voice had been young, maybe early 20s, and male. It had trembled with fear, but underneath that fear was something else, desperation sharpened by guilt. The caller hadn't just stumbled upon that mine, he had been part of it. That much was clear in the way his words cracked when he said, "I had no choice." Traoré could still hear the details replaying in his mind as clearly as if the man were still speaking. "There are over 200 children, maybe more. Boys and girls. They dig with their hands, they're barefoot, covered in mud. We give them one meal a day sometimes, not even that. Some faint, some die. If they slow down, they're whipped. I've seen it. I did nothing. Until now." The president clenched his jaw. "Some of them are only 5. They cry in their sleep. They call out for their mothers, and no one listens." Traoré remembered the pause, the kind of pause that stretches longer in memory. The caller had seemed to gather courage from somewhere deep inside, the way someone does when they know their life might be measured in minutes. "It's in the east, near Compiègne. Not on any map. You'll have to take the old logging road, past the abandoned timber factory. There's a narrow trail overgrown. No one uses it. They chose that place on purpose. No one goes there anymore. No one dares." His voice had begun to crack. "You're the only one who can stop this. The only one they might not kill on sight. Please, if you don't come soon." And then static. The line didn't disconnect. It died, as if cut, or burned, or smashed in someone's hand. Back in the present, Traoré broke from his trance as the door behind him opened. General Alba stepped in, adjusting his collar eyes, still adjusting to the light. Behind him, Commander Idris followed, alert and already armed. "You called?" Sir Traoré turned toward them, voice clear, steely measured. "We have an emergency," he said. "Unverified, unconfirmed. But I believe it." He handed Alba a notepad where he'd scribbled keywords: Compiègne, old logging road, timber factory, 200 children. Idris frowned. Children. Traoré nodded. Working in an illegal gold mine. No food, no care, no hope. The caller was anonymous, but he didn't sound like a liar. He sounded like someone confessing his sins before dying. Oba scanned the notes, then looked up. "If it's true, someone is making a lot of money off those kids." "Yes," Traoré said. "And tonight, that ends." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Traoré picked up the military jacket from his desk and slipped it on. It fit like it remembered him. He adjusted the collar, grabbed his service cap, and walked toward the door. "We leave in 20 minutes. Tell no one. Lights off. Convoy only. Bring medics and 2 ambulances." Oba raised an eyebrow. "You're coming," Traoré paused. "If I send men to find ghosts, they might hesitate. But if the ghost is real and I'm with them, then no one questions what must be done." And with that, the president stepped into the hallway, into the night, chasing a voice on a deadline, and the faintest chance of saving 200 forgotten souls. 20 minutes. That's all it took. In a world where decisions often drag through committees and delays, 20 minutes was a miracle. But this wasn't a decision made by advisors or signed on paper. This was instinct, and instinct moved faster than bureaucracy ever could. Within 5 minutes of receiving the anonymous call, President Ibrahim Traoré was in full motion. Orders had been given, not by written memo, not by email, but face-to-face, eye-to-eye with urgency that couldn't be misread. General Alba moved like a man whose boots had seen war, calm, precise, but with a fire in his chest. He organized the convoy himself, selecting only the most trusted soldiers, handpicked from the elite guard. Men who followed orders, yes, but more importantly, men who followed justice. Commander Idris oversaw the weapons detail. No heavy artillery, no tanks. This was not an invasion. It was a rescue. They would move like shadows, silent, fast, and unseen. The kind of mission you didn't write down. The kind of mission you carried in your conscience. The president, now fully dressed in his olive military jacket, with the old service patches still sewn on, walked the halls of the palace with purpose. Every step echoed through the marble as guards turned and stood to attention, not because they were ordered to, but because they could feel it in the air. Something was happening tonight, and it wasn't political. This wasn't about laws or approval ratings or diplomatic statements. This was personal. There were children suffering, children with no names, no voice, no help. And somewhere out there, buried in the dirt, their tiny hands were still clawing at rock and soil, not knowing that help was on the way. At exactly 2:02 a.m., the convoy assembled in the east courtyard. No flashing lights, no engines running, just 8 black jeeps, 2 unmarked medical vans, and 22 soldiers in silent readiness. They stood like statues in the dark, waiting for the man who had called them, not just to serve, but to believe. Then the doors opened. President Traoré emerged tall and still framed by the soft amber light of the palace. His eyes were sharp now, no longer tired, no longer burdened by paper and politics. There was a soldier in him again, but this time he wasn't going to war for territory or power. He was going for children. He walked straight to Alba and Idris. "Keep lights off until we're deep into the bush," he said. "We don't know who's watching. We don't know how far their reach is. But we do know this: the longer we wait, the more they suffer." Alba nodded once. All men accounted for. "Ready to move." Idris looked over the maps. "The trail is narrow. If that caller was telling the truth, we'll be leaving the main road within an hour." Traoré studied the layout, memorizing key turns. Then he stepped back, looked at his men, and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Tonight is not a mission. It's not an operation. It's a promise. We are not soldiers tonight. We are guardians. And if we fail, no one will know. No one will come after. So we don't fail. Not tonight." No one spoke, but their eyes locked with his, and that was enough. At 2:15 a.m., the engine started. No sirens, no headlights. The gates of the palace opened with a low, mechanical groan. The convoy slipped out into the empty city streets like a ghost caravan. The buildings loomed in silence. The moon hung low, casting long shadows over the narrow roads. As they left the capital behind, the landscape changed. Streetlights vanished. Pavement turned to dust. Trees thickened. The air grew heavier, more humid. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, and then all was still again. In the lead jeep, President Traoré sat forward, staring into the dark horizon. He wasn't thinking about press conferences or political blowback. He wasn't thinking about re-election or speeches. He was thinking about the face of a 5-year-old boy, covered in dirt, eyes sunken from hunger. And he was thinking, hold on, just a little longer. I'm coming. The convoy moved like a whisper through the sleeping outskirts of Ouagadougou, its engines humming, low headlights off, guided only by the moonlight and the memory of a voice that had vanished into static. President Traoré sat in the lead vehicle, eyes locked on the road ahead, his fingers laced together in quiet tension. No one spoke, not even the soldiers. Inside each vehicle, the silence was heavy, not from fear, but from the kind of focus that comes when you know the mission you're on is unlike any before. The city soon fell away behind them. Streetlights grew sparse, then disappeared entirely. Cracked asphalt gave way to dirt, and the occasional flicker of a distant village fire was all that hinted at life in the dark. The further they drove, the more the night changed. The wind turned cooler, the sky deeper, the forest thicker. Trees lined the road like silent guards, tall and motionless, their branches forming narrow tunnels that swallowed sound. The air here was different, still damp and oddly heavy. Even the insects had gone quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Occasionally a bat would cut across the sky, or the faint hoot of an owl would echo far off, but nothing else stirred. It was the kind of place that felt like it had been forgotten by time, and deliberately so. They passed through the remnants of old villages, places marked only by the shadows of mud walls and crumbling wells. President Traoré leaned forward, scanning the darkened shapes. Once these villages had been full of laughter and markets and children. Now they were shells abandoned years ago, when the land became dry and the roads unsafe. There was something eerie about them, as though the walls still held memories, and those memories were watching them pass. In the second vehicle, Commander Idris checked the map again under a red light. "We should be nearing the turnoff soon," he muttered. "The logging road, if it still exists." Traoré heard him through the earpiece. "It exists," he said quietly. "They always use places no one dares go. That's how they keep things hidden." 5 more minutes passed, then 10. The convoy slowed slightly, tires crunching over gravel as the trees pressed in tighter. The main road thinned until it became barely a trail. Then just beyond a rusted sign swallowed in vines it appeared. A narrow path barely wide enough for a single vehicle split off into the forest. The trees here seemed darker, older, leaning inwards like they were trying to hide the path from the sky. The convoy stopped. Alba got out first, flashlight in hand, and stepped toward the overgrown track. He brushed aside the branches, revealing faint tire grooves beneath the moss and dirt. "This is it," he said over the radio. "Logging road. Abandoned but used recently. Tracks are fresh." Traoré stepped out of his jeep and looked into the void beyond. The entrance looked like a wound in the jungle, black, narrow, quiet. The men behind him adjusted their gear, checked weapons, tightened boots. Still no one spoke. The air itself seemed to resist words now. He turned to the team. "From here we go slow. Lights stay off, eyes open. No mistakes." As they drove in, trees closed around them, forming a tunnel of foliage. Branches scraped against the sides of the jeep's leaves, tapping softly against the windows like warning knocks. It felt as if the forest were swallowing them whole. Inside the lead vehicle, Traoré closed his eyes for a second, not to rest, but to remember the voice again. "They're starving, Mr. President. Some of them are only 5. He opened his eyes. They were getting close. The convoy could go no further. The forest had thickened into a wall of green and shadow. Trees leaned too close now, and the logging trail narrowed into a crooked footpath barely wide enough for one man at a time. The jeeps were left behind. Engines cut. Radios silenced. From here on, it would be boots on dirt and breath held tight. President Traoré led the way, machete in hand, cutting through low branches and vines that clung like fingers. Behind him, General Alba and Commander Idris followed silently, along with 2 medics, a tracker, and a unit of 12 hand-picked soldiers. Each man carried only what was necessary: sidearms, flashlights, water, and conviction. The jungle around them seemed to watch their every move. The deeper they went, the more unnatural the quiet became. There were no birds here, no insects. Even the wind had stopped moving. It was the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise because you sensed something at the end of it. After nearly an hour of careful descent through tangled brush and uneven stone, the trees suddenly opened up and they saw it. The land dropped sharply into a natural hollow, wide and jagged, surrounded by high ridges of rock and dirt. At the center of this pit was a crude open mining site, roughly carved out of the earth with makeshift wooden scaffolds and shallow pools of dirty water, reflecting the pale glow of a few flickering floodlights. The lights were powered by portable generators that buzzed and sputtered, casting uneven shadows across the scene. It looked like a graveyard in motion, and in that graveyard, children, dozens of them, maybe more. Small figures moved like ghosts across the site. Some were waist-deep in pits filled with mud and gravel, digging with rusted pans and broken tools. Others carried heavy sacks of crushed rock on their backs, slipping on the wet earth, too tired to cry out. Their clothes were torn, hanging off their thin frames like rags. None wore shoes. Their feet were swollen, blistered, some bleeding. Several had cloths tied around infected wounds, flies buzzing undisturbed. They didn't speak. They didn't even look up. They just worked. A boy no older than 7 tried to lift a bucket of silted water, stumbled, and fell face first into the mud. The bucket tipped, spilling across the ground. He didn't get up. He just lay there, breathing heavily, his arms trembling. From the edge of the pit, one of the guards, a large man with a rifle slung across his back, stormed over. Without a word, he kicked the boy sharply in the ribs. "Get up," he barked. The boy curled in on himself but didn't move. The guard raised his leg again. That's when President Traoré's hand shot up. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His team froze mid-step, crouching instantly. Guns were drawn but silently, eyes sharp, movement calculated. The president's jaw tightened as he watched the scene. His fists clenched so hard his knuckles went white. There was something primal in the way he stared, not just anger but a deep, controlled rage, the kind that simmers long before it explodes. His voice came out in a whisper. "Commander," he said, eyes never leaving the boy. "We move. Quiet. Clean. No noise. No mercy." Idris gave a small nod and tapped his communicator twice, signals prearranged, practiced. The soldiers fanned out like shadows circling the perimeter, taking positions behind outcroppings and rusted equipment. The medics remained back, waiting for the signal. Traoré, still crouched among the tall grass, exhaled slowly. He counted the guards, 6 all armed. They were relaxed, unaware. One leaned against a barrel smoking. Another laughed as he watched 2 children struggle to drag a sack together. There was no discipline here, just arrogance. A belief that no one would ever come this far. But someone had. And he wasn't leaving without every child in that pit. The boy still hadn't moved. Traoré lowered his head just enough to speak to himself. "Hold on, little one," he whispered. "We're here." The air was thick, still. Even the insects seemed to know what was coming. From their positions around the perimeter, the soldiers waited for the signal. No one moved. No one breathed too loud. Fingers hovered over triggers, eyes locked on their targets. It wasn't just about surprise, it was about timing. One wrong second, one sound too early, and children could die. President Traoré crouched behind a crumbled rock outcrop, his eyes fixed on the guard still standing over the collapsed boy. The man had lost interest now, grumbling to himself as he walked away, his boot leaving a print in the mud. Another guard was pouring himself tea from a dented thermos. Laughter echoed from 2 others who leaned against a makeshift shack, rifles slung casually on their shoulders. Complacency. That was their weakness, and tonight it would be their downfall. Traoré turned to Commander Idris. Just 2 words, barely more than a whisper. "Do it." In an instant, Idris raised his hand, made 3 quick gestures, then tapped his earpiece twice. The team responded like clockwork. From 4 directions, smoke grenades flew silently through the air, landing across the site with dull thuds. A moment later, boom, hiss. Thick clouds of white smoke erupted, swallowing the mine in a blinding fog. Shouts rang out in confusion. Lights flickered wildly as guards stumbled, coughing and panicking. One fired a shot blindly into the air. Another tripped and hit the ground with a crash. Then shadows moved. From the smoke emerged figures in black, not running, not yelling, precise, silent, deadly. The first guard went down before he could raise his weapon, his rifle kicked away as 2 soldiers pinned him with zip cuffs. The second tried to run but was tripped, tackled, and silenced. The others were taken just as swiftly, no noise, no bloodshed, just swift justice executed by men who knew exactly what they were doing. Within 3 minutes it was over. The smoke began to clear, revealing a transformed scene. Where chaos once reigned, order had returned. The guards, now disarmed and restrained, lay face down in the dirt. The mine's generator buzzed on, still lighting the space in a dim yellow haze. But the air felt different now. Still tense, but not with fear. With change. The children hadn't moved. They stood frozen, eyes wide, tools still in their hands, unsure whether they had just been rescued or raided by yet another group of men with guns. Some of the younger ones began to cry quietly. One little girl dropped her pan of muddy water and covered her face. A boy near her took a step back, slipping and falling on the ground, hands raised in surrender. The others huddled together, trembling, flinching with every sound. Then a new figure stepped forward, not masked, not armed, not yelling. President Ibrahim Traoré. He walked slowly past the guards, past the soldiers, past the broken equipment and pools of muddy water, until he stood right in the center of the pit, surrounded by silence and fear. The children stared. He looked around at their faces, their injuries, their hunger, their hollow eyes, and something in him broke, but he didn't let it show. He stood tall, voice strong, but kind. "My name is Ibrahim Traoré," he said, not shouting, just loud enough to be heard over the still settling dust. "I am your president." No one moved. He took a slow step forward. "I have come to take you home." The children didn't react. Some blinked, others looked at one another, uncertain. Then one voice, small shaking, broke through. "Are you really the president?" He turned toward the voice. A boy no older than 7, hair-matted, knees scraped, stood with his arms hanging limp at his sides. Traoré looked him in the eyes and nodded once. "Yes, and you are free now." The words echoed through the mind like thunder rolling through stone. A sound broke one that didn't come from boots or bullets. A sob, then another. The children began to cry, not out of fear, but from something they hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. One by one, tools dropped to the ground. Little hands reached out. A girl walked up to Traoré and grabbed his hand. A boy fell to his knees, weeping into his shirt. Another wrapped his arms around a medic without asking. Traoré stood there, surrounded not by gold but by children. He looked at them, at the ruined mine, and whispered under his breath, only for himself, "They buried your futures in the ground, and tonight we're digging them back out." The smoke had settled, but the air remained thick with something heavier than gunpowder grief. Even in victory, the silence that followed the raid was not celebratory. It was somber, reverent, like the quiet after a funeral. Because in many ways that night, the pit they had uncovered was a graveyard, not of bodies, but of childhoods lost. Within minutes of securing the site, the medical team moved in, weaving through the mud and scattered tools with practiced urgency. They brought warm blankets, clean water, and metal cases filled with bandages, antiseptics, glucose strips, and rehydration sachets. But even the most experienced medics weren't prepared for what they saw. The children didn't scream. They didn't run. They just stood there, like ghosts. Some flinched when touched. Others instinctively covered their heads, expecting another blow. A few even tried to keep working, unsure whether stopping would mean punishment. It took gentle hands, soft voices, and sometimes tears from the rescuers themselves to convince them you are safe now. President Traoré walked slowly through the site, stopping every few feet. A boy with a swollen eye sat alone near a wooden beam, his face blank, his foot bleeding into the dirt. The president knelt before him and removed a handkerchief from his pocket. Wordlessly, he dabbed the wound. The boy watched him with disbelief. "They told us we'd die here," the boy whispered. Traoré paused, met his eyes, and replied, "They lied." Not far away, 2 girls huddled under a tarp. One was maybe 8, the other no older than 5. Their clothes were soaked, and one had a deep cut on her shoulder, wrapped in a rag stained dark brown. A medic offered to help, but the older girl pulled her sister back, shaking her head violently. Then the president approached. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside them on the muddy ground. He removed his jacket and placed it over the smaller girl's shoulders. The older one stared at him, confused. "Are you really the president?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "But presidents don't come to places like this." Traoré nodded slowly. "Maybe they should." She said nothing more, but she let the medic tend the wound. Elsewhere, a child fainted while drinking water too fast. Another began to cry when he was handed a soft roll of bread, not because it wasn't enough, but because it was warm. Some of the younger ones wrapped their arms around the medics and wouldn't let go. Several had whip marks on their backs. Others showed signs of untreated infections, swollen joints, open sores. But for every wound, there was now a hand reaching out to heal. As the hours passed, the pit transformed. Tarps became triage stations. Blankets turned into makeshift beds. Soldiers laid down rifles to carry children in their arms, mud and all. The hum of the generators was now accompanied by the softer, steadier sounds of care water being poured. Soft reassurances whispered the gentle tearing of gauze. At the edge of the pit, a boy stood staring at the sky. He couldn't have been more than 10. His hands were cut and cracked, his eyes distant. President Traoré walked up behind him. "What are you looking at?" he asked gently. The boy replied without turning. "I forgot the stars were real." Traoré looked up, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to feel hope. Above them, the sky was clear, the moon high, the stars shining. The nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. But in this moment under this sky, surrounded by broken tools and trembling hands learning to feel again, something began to shift. The long night of rescue had begun, not with sirens or headlines, but with a simple, powerful truth: someone had come. Someone had listened. And someone still cared. The first blush of dawn stretched across the horizon as the convoy began its slow return to Ouagadougou. The forest, which had loomed hours earlier like a wall of darkness and dread, now softened under the growing light. The trees no longer felt like barriers. They stood tall but still bathed in morning mist, as if bearing silent witness to what had happened hours earlier. In the lead vehicle, President Traoré sat with his hands folded, no longer clenched but calm, watchful. His uniform was streaked with mud. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes remained alert. In the rearview mirror, he glanced at the vehicles behind him. One by one, they carried precious cargo. The children wrapped in blankets nestled against medics, some in their own silent thoughts, some already fast asleep. It was the first time many of them had ever ridden in a vehicle. The gentle rumble of the engine, the soft cushions beneath their small frames, the warm air from the vents, it was all foreign, and yet safe. Some children curled up instantly, eyes fluttering closed within minutes. Others stared quietly out the windows, watching trees blur past as if unsure whether this was a dream or if they'd wake up back in the pit. A few clung tightly to soldiers, not out of fear, but out of instinct, holding on to the first adult who hadn't raised a hand to hurt them. President Traoré looked over his shoulder at one point and saw a girl maybe 6 years old, fast asleep, with her head resting on a soldier's lap. Her small fingers still clutched a biscuit someone had given her. She hadn't even taken a bite. She was too tired. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm that spoke more than words ever could piece, perhaps for the first time in her life. By the time the convoy reached the outskirts of the capital, the sky had fully opened into morning. The sun peeked through scattered clouds, painting golden streaks across the city. It was still early, most residents unaware of what had happened overnight, unaware that a tragedy had been intercepted, reversed, and rewritten before their day had even begun. Waiting at the edge of the city was a team of medical responders, child welfare officers, and a small battalion of trusted aides already briefed on the situation. A secure shelter previously used for displaced flood victims had been cleared and re-equipped overnight. Clean beds, hot meals, showers, fresh clothes. Not perfect, but safe. For now, it would become a temporary home. As the convoy arrived, the gates opened without fanfare. No cameras, no press, just coordinated, quiet action. The children were carried or guided out one by one, some still sleeping, others blinking at the daylight like it was something entirely new. A few hesitated, unsure if stepping off the truck meant the end of safety. But when they saw familiar faces, medic, soldiers, and especially President Traoré, they moved. Inside the shelter, trauma counselors waited in soft, neutral-colored rooms. There were coloring books on the tables, teddy bears in corners, warm tea, gentle smiles. No uniforms, no weapons. Just people who knew how to talk without making pain worse. The president walked through the corridors, slowly stopping at every room, checking every corner. Not to inspect, but to assure. A boy sitting cross-legged on a mattress looked up and waved shyly. Traoré nodded back, a half-smile cracking through the exhaustion. Later, in a makeshift office turned crisis center, his aides reported initial health checks, malnutrition in over 70% of the children, skin infections, dehydration, psychological trauma. Some didn't remember their own names. Some didn't speak at all. "We'll begin counseling in rotations," one therapist explained. "It will take time, months, maybe years." The president listened, then simply said, "However long it takes, we do it. Every child, no shortcuts, no silence." Outside, the sun had risen fully. A new day had begun in Burkina Faso. But for 200 children, it wasn't just a new day, it was a first chance. And in the heart of the capital, beneath the walls of the presidential shelter, a quiet promise began to take root. They would never go back to the pit. While the rescued children rested in soft beds and began slowly to relearn the meaning of safety, others were watching, and they were not celebrating. In a private villa far from the capital, behind high walls and thicker curtains, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Men in crisp suits, some local, some foreign, gathered around a long table. The television was muted, but the images were familiar. President Traoré walking barefoot through the muddy pit, lifting children into his arms. The room was quiet, but not out of admiration. It was the silence of calculating men who had lost something valuable. The raid on the illegal mine had not just exposed a crime, it had cost them millions. Equipment lost, gold stolen back, operations compromised, and most damaging of all, their secrecy shattered. One of them, a heavy-set man with a scar over his eyebrow, set his glass down hard. He made this personal. He didn't just send soldiers, he came himself. Now they see him as a savior. A younger man leaned forward. Then let's make the world see something else. 2 days later, the shelter gates welcomed what appeared to be a group of foreign journalists from a humanitarian agency. Their van was white, marked with the logo of an international children's foundation. They arrived with gifts, boxes of sweets, toys, warm smiles, and laminated IDs. Most of the security staff, overworked and sleep-deprived, waved them through after a few moments of polite inspection. But not all the guards were clean. One assigned to the East Gate had been quietly bought the night before. A thick envelope passed under a parked car, a promise that no one would ever know. And so, with a nod and a whisper of, "You have 30 minutes," the doors opened. Inside the shelter, the visitors moved gently, carefully. They didn't shout or push. They crouched down to the children's level. They asked soft questions in French and broken Moray. They handed out candy and whispered promises. "We're here to protect you. You're still in danger." Some of the children hesitated, confused. A boy asked why the president said we're safe. The man smiled. "That wasn't your president. That man is the boss of another mine. He moved you from one place to another. This is just a new prison." Another leaned in, voice syrupy. "If you tell the camera what we say, the world will see. You'll be rescued. Maybe even go to Europe. Don't you want that?" And so, manipulated by confusion and tempted by escape, some children spoke. Not all. Just a few. But enough. A small girl with tear-streaked cheeks looked into the lens and repeated what they told her. "He said he saved us, but he's using us. We're not safe." Another boy, no older than 8, glanced at the man behind the camera before saying, "We still have to work. It's the same." The camera panned across tired faces, catching every trembling lip and confused eye. Then it cut. The team packed up, handed out a few more sweets, and left the shelter smiling politely as they passed the bribed guard. 4 hours later, the video hit the internet. It was edited masterfully. Dramatic music, subtitles in English, French, and Arabic. The title screamed across screens like wildfire: Burkina Faso's president exposed children. Claim he uses them for illegal gold mining. Within hours, it was everywhere. Shared by activists, amplified by angry users, embedded by suspicious news outlets that had never cared about Burkina Faso before. Twitter exploded. Hashtags trended. Instagram Reels picked up segments of crying children. YouTube channels reposted the footage with red arrows and words like scandal, betrayal, and child slavery. Some called for international investigations. Others labeled Traoré a fraud. "Just another African strongman," one tweet read, "no different from the warlords he claims to fight." The irony, of course, was that few asked why the children's faces were never shown fully, or why no verified news agencies had posted the original clip. The outrage was louder than the facts. Back at the presidential palace, President Traoré sat alone in his office, watching the video play on loop. The children he had held, fed, and knelt beside now accused him of the very horror he had rescued them from. His jaw tightened, his fist clenched. His voice, low but sharp, cut the silence. "What is this?" The storm came fast. Not from the jungle, not from within the government, not even from political opposition. It came from screens. Within 24 hours of the video's release, it had been viewed over 5 million times. Shared across Facebook, reposted on Twitter, sliced into TikTok Reels, and picked up by dozens of international news outlets. Hungry for the next scandal, the footage of Burkina Faso's children accusing their own president became the narrative, whether it was true or not. On Instagram, influencers posted black and white photos of the children's faces with captions like "Africa's shame." A trending tweet from a well-known human rights lawyer read, "Ibrahim Traoré pretends to be a liberator, but the children say otherwise. We must demand the truth." Hashtag surged, hashtag children, not gold, hashtag Burkina, truth exposed, hashtag Traoré, lies major NGOs release cautious but pointed statements? If these reports are accurate, one declared they represent a gross violation of human rights. We call for immediate international investigation. Several global donors to Burkina Faso's education and food relief programs paused funding pending clarification. One even requested a full audit of how aid money had been spent in the last 6 months. It didn't matter that the video had no verified source. It didn't matter that no reputable media outlet had interviewed the children directly. In the age of viral outrage, perception moved faster than truth, and by the time anyone thought to ask deeper questions, the damage had already taken root. Inside the presidential palace, the mood had shifted from relief to disbelief. In the Situation Room, aides crowded around laptops, scanning headlines and social feeds. They looked tense, frantic, helpless. Reports poured in, embassies calling for explanations, partner governments requesting statements, civil society groups demanding press access to the shelter. President Traoré said nothing. He stood alone at the far end of the room, his eyes fixed on the large screen mounted on the wall. The video played again, muted, but the images were enough. The little girl with the oversized blanket claiming she was still working. The boy staring into the lens, voice trembling as he said, "He brought us from one mine to another." Traoré had held that boy in his arms. He had watched him cry, not from fear, but from hunger and exhaustion. He had wrapped him in a jacket. Now the same child was unknowingly being used as a weapon against him. One of the younger aides, clearly nervous, stepped forward with a tablet. "Mr. President, CNN has requested a live interview. They're calling this a potential child slavery cover-up." Traoré didn't turn. He continued watching as his face appeared on the video, grainy, zoomed in from the pit. Then came the headline, "Hero or Monster President, Traoré under fire after rescue mission backfires." His jaw clenched. He blinked slowly, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but so low and cold it made the room still. "Who let them in?" No one answered. "Who gave strangers access to my children?" Still nothing. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping across the room. Not with fury, not yet, but with something worse, betrayal. "We guarded them from bullets, but not from lies." General Alba stepped forward cautiously. "We've begun an internal investigation. Someone in the security team may have taken a bribe. We're tracing all visitor logs now." The president nodded slowly. Then he walked to the table, pressed his palms flat against the surface, and leaned in. "They think they've hurt me," he said, voice gaining weight. "But they've hurt the children. These are the same little ones who cried in my arms. And now the world believes they were props." He looked up. "We are not fighting men anymore. We are fighting shadows." In the corner, Commander Idris murmured, "What do we do now?" Traoré straightened eyes hard. "We tell the truth, but first we find the ones who turned it into a weapon." And with that, the president of Burkina Faso declared war, not with guns, not with armies, but with the only thing more powerful than a lie proof. The clock struck midnight, but no one in the presidential palace was sleeping. Lights blazed in the West Wing, a space usually reserved for state banquets and visiting dignitaries, now transformed into a temporary war room. Around the long oval table sat a dozen of the president's most trusted officials, generals, intelligence chiefs, communication and strategists, child welfare experts. No one spoke above a whisper. No one smiled. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. President Ibrahim Traoré entered without announcement. No formalities, no greetings. Just presence, commanding, heavy and focused. He didn't sit. He walked slowly to the head of the table and placed both hands on its surface. "What happened to us," he began, "isn't just betrayal. It's infiltration, psychological warfare. And if we don't act now fast and with clarity, we lose everything we've fought for." He raised his eyes and locked eyes with his intelligence director. "I want names. The fake journalists. Who they were, where they came from, how they got in. I want airport footage, shelter logs, border activity, every bribe they paid and to whom." The director nodded. "We've begun tracing license plates from the footage. The logo on their van doesn't match any known NGO in our registry." Traoré turned to General Alba. "Double the guards at the shelter. No one goes in or out without written clearance. Armed watch on all gates 24 hours. I don't care if they're foreign friendly or wearing priest robes. Nobody speaks to the children without our approval. Oba answered without hesitation. It's already in motion. Next, he looked at Commander Idris. Interrogate the guards on rotation that day. Start with the East Gate. Someone took money. I want to know who, and I want him in custody before dawn. Idris gave a tight nod, jaw clenched. Then the president took a breath, just long enough to steady his voice. And bring in the children's psychologists. I want full support on the ground. Our kids are not actors. They are not pawns. But if even one of them still thinks we're the enemy, it's because someone planted that seed and we have to pull it out before it grows. The room fell silent. Then an aide from the communication office hesitated before speaking. Sir, I think we need to prepare a statement. International pressure is building fast. The UN is asking for transparency. France and Germany have both issued formal inquiries. If we stay silent, Traoré raised a hand. We won't stay silent, but we won't respond like politicians. No spin, no damage control. When we speak, it will be with truth, not slogans. He paused, voice lowering. We let our guard down. They got close enough to twist the mouths of children. And now the world doubts us. Another official leaned forward, his tone more urgent. Sir, with respect, the people need reassurance. Some of them are already turning. Marches are being planned. Opposition parties are calling this a scandal of leadership. Even our allies are uneasy. The president didn't flinch. He stepped back from the table and crossed his arms, thinking not with panic but with the grim calm of a man familiar with losing battles that still had to be fought. Public trust is like a bridge, he said slowly. Once cracked, you don't walk over it with speeches. You rebuild it one stone at a time, and you do it in the open. He looked around the room, his eyes steel. So that's what we'll do. The orders were clear. The night would not end in sleep, but in action. Men and women filed out to begin investigations, draft protocols, resecure the fragile hope that had been nearly crushed under the weight of a single lie. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, as the digital storm raged on and the world's eyes narrowed in suspicion, Ibrahim Traoré stood firm. He had fought in jungles. He had faced bullets. But this was different. This was a war for truth. The gate creaked open in the gray light of early morning. No motorcade, no cameras, no uniformed entourage. Just one man in a plain jacket walking slowly toward the shelter as dew clung to the grass and birds began their songs. President Ibrahim Traoré had come alone. He had refused all security, not out of pride but out of understanding. There were no threats here that a gun could stop. What he faced today was more dangerous than bullets. It was something that lived in the minds of children, doubt. As he approached the building, a nurse inside noticed him first. Her eyes wide in surprise but not afraid. She simply nodded once and quietly stepped aside, letting him pass. The hallway felt different now, not hostile but cautious. It was no longer the place of warm hugs and whispered thank yous. Instead, silence greeted him, and eyes that didn't sparkle anymore. In one of the rooms, a group of children sat on mats, some drawing, others playing with donated toys. When they saw him enter, several froze. One little girl instinctively pulled her teddy bear tighter and scooted back against the wall. A few boys stopped mid-game. Their eyes narrowed in uncertainty. A nurse began to stand as if to explain, but Traoré raised a gentle hand. It's all right. Let me speak to them. He stepped further into the room, then slowly knelt on the mat, not just to be at their level, but because he needed them to see him without power, without armor. He looked around at the faces, some familiar, some shadowed now by confusion. His voice was soft but steady. I heard some of you are afraid again, he said. That someone told you I lied. That I brought you here to use you. That I'm not really your president. No one spoke. I don't blame you, he continued. When you've been hurt, it's hard to know who to trust. And if someone lied to you about me, I'm not angry. I just want the truth. Even if it hurts, I can take it. Just tell me the truth. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a small voice broke it. A man came. With candy, said a boy, barely above a whisper. He said, You're not who you said you are. Traoré turned toward him gently. And did you believe him? The boy looked down at the floor. We didn't know what to believe. He said if we said what he told us, someone would take us far away, to a better place, maybe even Europe. Another child chimed in, her voice trembling. He said, "You were like the other men, just hiding it better." A third older boy stood up slowly. "We thought we were doing the right thing. We're sorry. We didn't mean to lie." Traoré didn't move. He simply looked at them, these children who had been betrayed more times than they could count now, apologizing for being manipulated again. "No," he said quietly. "Don't be sorry. You were scared. You were tricked. And if I were your age in your place, I might have believed them too." He paused, letting his words settle. "But I came here because I promised you something that night in the forest. I said you would live, that you would be free, that you would become strong. And I meant every word." Some children had begun to cry this time, not from fear, but from shame, from the weight of confusion. Traoré stood slowly, but not before placing a hand on the shoulder of the boy who had first spoken. "I forgive you, all of you. What matters now is what we do next." One of the girls wiped her eyes and whispered, "You're still going to help us." "Yes," he said, now more than ever. Outside the room, a few counselors watched in silence. One of them turned to the head nurse and said, "I've never seen anything like that." Back inside, the children slowly approached him. A girl took his hand. Another leaned against his side. One by one, they began to return to him, not as a hero, not as a myth, but as someone real who had knelt down to their level and never once raised his voice. That night, a new trust was born, not through force or speeches, but through something much harder to earn: honest, patient love. The air inside the shelter felt different now, not heavy with fear or uncertainty, but tentative like the first light after a long, endless storm. The children who had shrunk away days before now lingered near the door frames, peeking into the hallway, watching the man they once feared walk among them again. President Traoré sat cross-legged on the mat, still in the same plain jacket he wore when he arrived. His back leaned slightly against the wall, hands resting open on his knees, not giving orders, not making speeches. Just waiting. Then one child stepped forward. It was a boy named Kasi, barely 10, with eyes far older than his age, eyes that had seen too much too soon. He held something in his fist, a piece of crumpled candy wrapper. He looked down at it, then up at the president. "They gave us these," Kasi said quietly. "Said it was a gift, that you were a bad man." A ripple of silence moved through the room. A few other children shifted uncomfortably. One girl looked like she might cry again. Another, braver now, stepped closer to the circle. They said, "You didn't rescue us, that you were taking us to another mine, that this was fake." The words fell like soft stones, heavy despite the gentle tone. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't interrupt. He nodded once, slowly, inviting more. A third child voice, barely audible, whispered, "They said, if we said what they told us, we could leave. Maybe go to Europe, that someone rich would come get us." Then silence again, this time deeper, more raw. Finally, one of the boys, older than the rest, maybe 12, walked up and crouched in front of the president. His eyes glistened with guilt. His hands trembled. "We're sorry," he said. "We didn't know who to believe." And with that, without warning, he threw his arms around Traoré's neck and hugged him tightly. It wasn't the kind of hug meant for cameras or sympathy. It was desperate, clinging, a silent apology wrapped in trembling arms. The president didn't move at first. Then he placed one hand on the boy's back, steady and warm. "You don't have to be sorry," he said softly. "You were lied to. That's not your fault." The boy pulled back, sniffling. "But we said bad things. They recorded us. Everyone thinks it's true." Traoré looked at all the children now. His voice remained calm, but his words carried weight. "You're children. You shouldn't have had to carry lies or truth on your shoulders. That's the job of adults, of people like me." He stood up slowly. "But now that you've told the truth to me, we can begin to tell it to the world." One by one, the children began to speak. Short sentences, fragments, confessions, bits of candy, promises made and broken, fake kindness, sweets handed out like bait. Slowly, the full picture began to form, and in every word there was not just pain, but healing. Forgiveness wasn't demanded. It was given freely. And in that quiet room, no longer guarded by walls or cameras, Something unshakable began to grow between them, trust reborn through tears. Later that evening, Traoré met privately with his inner circle. His eyes were clearer, his steps more certain. "We begin the truth campaign tomorrow," he said. "Not to defend my name, but to protect theirs." And outside the shelter beneath a rising moon, the capital waited tired, divided questioning. But the truth was no longer in hiding. It lived now in the voices of children, and they were ready to speak. The room wasn't glamorous. No flags, no dramatic lighting, no lavish backdrop. Just a plain hall inside the rescue center with rows of metal chairs, a few microphones, and two standing fans humming in the corners. But what it lacked in grandeur, it more than made up for in weight. Because here, finally, truth would speak and the world would listen. The president had insisted no PR firms, no speechwriters, no filtered statements. Only vetted journalists, international and local, who had undergone strict clearance. Some came with notebooks, others with cameras, but all entered the room with curiosity and a hint of doubt still lingering in their questions. At the front, seated behind a simple table, were the children. They looked different now, still thin, still healing. But there was light in their eyes. Their hair had been washed. Their clothes were clean. Some wore bright bracelets made by volunteers. Others still had small bandages peeking from beneath sleeves. But they were no longer shadows. They were survivors. President Traoré stood quietly at the back of the room, arms folded, surrounded by no one. He had already said all he needed to say in private. This moment belonged to the children. The room fell silent as the first child stepped forward. His name was Jonathan, 10 years old. He approached the microphone, slowly glancing once toward the president, before turning to face the rows of cameras and blinking lights. "The night the soldiers came, I thought it was the end." He paused. His voice was soft but clear. "I thought they came to beat us, like the others. But then this man," he pointed at Traoré, "he came and said, 'You are free now.' I didn't believe him, not at first. But then they gave us food, treated our wounds, said we'd never go back to the pit." He looked down, fiddling with a button on his shirt. "Last week, some men came with candy. They said we were still not safe, that this was just another mine, that the president was using us. They said if we told the cameras what they wanted, we'd be taken far away." He looked up again, stronger now. "We didn't know they were lying, but now we do. And I want the world to know the truth." There was no applause, no need. The silence was louder. One by one, more children came forward. A girl named Aminata spoke of carrying stones with broken hands. Another, Mamadou, showed the scar on his back from a guard who didn't like when I stopped to drink. Each story unfolded like a page turning. There were no dramatic flourishes, no exaggerated tears, only facts. Painful, raw, real. Then something unexpected happened. A girl no older than 6 walked up and stood at the mic without being prompted. She didn't speak right away. She looked at the journalists, then at her shoes. Then finally she said, "When we were underground, we thought no one cared. They told us nobody would ever come, but he did." She turned toward the back of the room. President Traoré came, and then she smiled. It was small, fragile, but radiant. That was the moment the dam broke. Even the most skeptical reporters lowered their pens. Some had tears in their eyes. One cameraman instinctively pulled back to capture the entire room in a wide, silent frame, as if afraid that any movement might disturb the moment. Finally, Traoré walked slowly to the front, not to speak over them, but beside them. "I did not come here to defend myself," he said. "I came to defend the truth. These children were hidden in darkness. Now they stand in light. Not because I am powerful, but because they are brave." He looked down at them, then back at the world. Those who lied, who used fear to hide their crimes, they will be found. But today is not about vengeance. Today is about giving these voices the stage they deserve. A soft murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. The live stream reached nearly 2 million views in the first hour. Messages flooded in, apologies from news outlets, statements of support from child rights groups, calls for action from global leaders. Some who had once condemned Traoré now shared the full press conference with one caption: "We were wrong." But the man himself didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply sat beside the children, his presence steady, grounded. because this wasn't the end. This was just truth's first breath and the beginning of justice's long walk forward. The lights in the national broadcast room were simple, unadorned. No stage, no banners. Just a wooden podium, a national flag, and one camera lived to millions. President Ibrahim Traoré stood behind the microphone, not as a man defending himself, but as a leader laying down his truth, his final card in a war not of guns, but of words. He didn't clear his throat, didn't adjust his tie. He just began quietly but with force that filled the room. When I went into that forest, I wasn't wearing a suit. I wore no medals. I carried no speech. I walked into the pit where children were digging for gold, not because it was political, but because it was right. He looked straight into the lens eyes, unwavering. Those who hurt them didn't need a flag. They needed only greed. And the world believed their lies faster than it questioned their motives. There was no teleprompter. Every word came from memory, from heart, and from something deeper conviction. "I don't need gold," he said, voice rising. "My wealth is not in mines or vaults. My wealth is in their future." He held up a photo of one of the rescued children smiling in the shelter garden just that morning. "In this face, I see what this country can become. Strong, kind, free. That is why I led the rescue. That is why I will not step aside no matter what lies are told, because we owe them more than survival. We owe them justice." He placed the photo down. "To those who spread falsehoods, you failed, because truth has a longer breath than lies, and now it has found its voice." He paused, letting silence carry the weight of what he had said. "To my people who doubted, I understand, but I ask you, walk with me now. Let us not be divided by deception, but united in what we know to be right." The speech ended not with a crescendo, but with clarity. And that clarity thundered louder than any slogan could. The video went live instantly, and this time the world didn't scroll past. It exploded. Within hours, the clip had surpassed 10 million views. Hashtags reversed course, hashtag Traoré truth, hashtag justice for the children, hashtag gold of Burkina. Influencers who had condemned him days ago now issued public apologies. World leaders who had demanded investigations now offered support. The children watched it from the shelter, some still with IVs in their arms, others sitting on folded blankets leaning on each other. When they saw him hold their photo, they clapped. Some cried. A journalist from Nairobi tweeted, "Not a speech, a reckoning." An educator in Paris posted, "He didn't defend himself. He defended them." That's leadership. But amid the celebration, President Traoré remained grounded. As aides brought him reports of changing headlines, as messages of solidarity poured in from embassies and foundations, he only said one thing: "The world believes us now, but that doesn't mean we've won." He turned to his intelligence chief. "Because the men who hurt those children are still hiding, still watching." And so while the nation caught its breath and the world exhaled relief, he prepared for the next chapter, not of words, but of action. Because truth had finally been heard. Now it was time for justice to move. The night was humid and unusually quiet at the outskirts of Ouagadougou. A black SUV pulled up to the heavily guarded entrance of a discreet military base. No signs, no lights, only silence and watchful eyes behind fences. A single man stepped out, hands raised, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "I need to speak to the president's special team," he said. "My name is Roland. I was one of them." Within minutes, he was brought into a secure interrogation room, bare walls, one table, two chairs. Commander Idris entered, first his face unreadable, followed by two intelligence officers who stood behind silently. Roland sat down slowly, clasping his hands as if trying to keep them from shaking. "I didn't plan this," he began, voice low, almost a whisper. "But I couldn't sleep anymore. Not after seeing those children. Not after what we did." Idris leaned forward slightly, nodding for him to continue. "We worked under him. Martin Dwamba." Roland said the name falling from his lips like a confession in church. "He's the one. The mastermind. The minds, the fake journalists, the money trail. It all goes back to him." He paused and pulled a small flash drive from his jacket pocket. "This has everything. Payment records, photos, videos, even voice notes. He didn't think I'd keep copies, but I did. I was scared until now." The officers exchanged glances. Idris took the drive without a word and slid it into a secure reader. The screen lit up, revealing folders named with cold, bureaucratic precision: Recruitment, Media Manipulation, Mind D Logistics Children. Records. "Where is Dwamba now?" Idris asked, his tone still calm. Roland looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "He's hiding near the eastern border. Private estate, armed guards, cameras everywhere. But if you move fast, you'll catch him." There was a heavy silence broken only by the soft hum of the overhead light. Idris stood up and walked out without another word. The evidence had spoken. The game had changed. Justice at last had a face to pursue, and its name was Martin Dwamba. The order came just before midnight. President Traoré stood at the operations center, arms crossed, voice calm but absolute. No media, no delay, no mercy. Satellite feeds confirmed the location: a sprawling private estate near Burkina Faso's eastern border, surrounded by high walls, hidden cameras, and armed guards. Owned by one man, Martin Dwamba. For years, Dwamba had operated in shadows. A philanthropist by day, a trafficker by night. He had dined with presidents, shaken hands with diplomats, and built his fortune on the backs of children. But tonight the mask would fall. By 2 a.m., a convoy of unmarked black trucks moved silently down a dirt road. Inside were hand-picked elite operatives trained for speed, precision, and silence. Commander Idris led them, his jaw tight, the flash drive from Roland's confession still in his vest pocket. The approach was surgical. Drones hovered high above disabling cameras with signal scramblers. Infrared confirmed 10 armed men inside. Dwamba was in his study alone, moving erratically. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the breach began. A small charge blew open the side gate, no louder than a muffled thud. Teams swept through corridors, subduing guards with silent takedowns. Room by room, they advanced toward the main wing. Inside the study, Dwamba stood over a fireproof bin, hands frantic, throwing papers, ledgers, and USB sticks into the flames. The room smelled of ink, sweat, and burning plastic. He never heard the door open. Commander Idris stepped in, weapon raised. 2 more agents followed. For a moment, everything was still except the crackling fire. Dwamba turned slowly, then smirked. "So, the little president sends soldiers now," he said, voice oozing contempt. "I always knew he was more stubborn than smart." Idris didn't respond. He simply nodded. "Hands behind your head." Dwamba raised an eyebrow defiantly. "You think this ends with me?" But he complied. As they cuffed him, he turned one last time toward the flames. "You can kill the story," he hissed, "but you'll never kill the system." Idris looked at him, dead cold. "We're not here to kill stories. We're here to finish them." Outside, the night air was still. The estate had fallen. Martin Dwamba, once untouchable, was now in chains. By dawn, the world would know. Justice was no longer knocking. It had kicked the door in. The nation held its breath. From city cafes to remote villages, radios buzzed and televisions flickered. Every eye, every ear was tuned to the same moment: the trial of Martin Dwamba. Escorted in shackles, wearing a beige prison jumpsuit, the once powerful tycoon entered the courtroom, flanked by heavily armed guards. Cameras flashed, but his expression remained unchanged, cold, arrogant, unreadable. The charges were read out loud. One after another, they echoed through the room like a drumbeat of justice. Child trafficking, forced labor, bribery, media manipulation, obstruction of justice, threats against the head of state. Then came the evidence. Screens lit up with documents recovered from his estate, bank transfers, linked to shell companies, invoices for security payouts, encrypted lists of purchased minors labeled by age and region. Photos, emails, and audio recordings were presented. There was no room for denial. And then came the testimony, Roland's full confession, recorded and played for the court in haunting clarity. He spoke of secret meetings, hidden minds forged NGO identities, the scripted video fed to the children. Martin said nothing. He didn't have to. The truth had already spoken for him. When the judge returned with the verdict, the silence was absolute. "Martin Dwamba, you have committed crimes not only against this nation, but against its most innocent souls. You traded childhood for profit, hope for darkness. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck. Justice had been served. Far away inside the rescue shelter, the children watched the verdict unfold on a small donated television. As Dwamba was led away in chains, one small boy pointed at the screen. "That's the man who lied to us." A girl whispered, "He said no one would care." But now they knew better, because someone did care. And this time justice wore the face of truth, and they had lived to see it. 1 year after the trial, a modern campus rises on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, Maison de Lumière, House of Light. Classrooms sparkle with fresh paint, solar panels hum on the roofs, and a wide courtyard bursts with jacaranda trees. 200 former child miners arrive in crisp blue and white uniforms, clutching new notebooks instead of rusted tools. In the center walkway, President Traoré appears holding hands with the youngest survivor, the boy who once collapsed in the pit. Teachers line the path. The boy looks up and smiles. Traoré squeezes his hand and guides him through the gates as drums begin to play. For these children, the bell's first ring is louder than any mine explosion. It is the sound of a life restarted. After the opening ceremony, Traoré kneels beside the same boy beneath a flowering acacia. His voice is low, certain you will live, you will learn, and one day you will lead. The words echo beyond the courtyard. Days later, cameras follow the president on a nationwide school tour. In village after village, he teaches students how to spot trafficking, how to speak up when silence is demanded, and why truth is stronger than fear. Children repeat his mantra, live, learn, lead, painting it on chalkboards and playground walls. A movement begins one classroom at a time. Standing before the National Assembly for a live broadcast, Traoré looks straight into the lens. To those who hurt children, your days are numbered. These children are the heart of our nation, and while I draw breath, I will protect them. Across Burkina Faso, televisions flicker, radios crackle, and street cafes fall silent. In Maison de Lumière, pupils watch from their bright library. When the speech ends, they erupt in applause. The camera fades to a sun-drenched classroom, children laughing over open books, window panes throwing bars of golden light across their desks. Outside, a bell rings again, not an alarm, but an invitation. Hope at last is on the timetable. This story reminds us that true leadership isn't about power, it's about compassion, courage, and standing up for those who can't speak for themselves. President Traoré didn't wait for permission. He acted from conscience. In a world clouded by injustice, one decision made in the dark brought light to hundreds of children. It proves that even amid lies and betrayal, truth can rise. And when it does, it heals. Question to audience. Have you ever seen someone stand up for what's right, even when the world doubted them? How did it change your view of courage? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.